everyone, and welcome to the latest interview in the Spotlight On series. Today we are joined by not just one, but two wonderful scientists, Alexis and Markia from Back in Genetics group, and they're going to be discussing that kind of group and what they're involved in as well in that area. So before we begin, ladies, if you can just introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about what you do as well.
Of course. I am Alexis Stutzman. I am a graduate student at UNC Chapel Hill. I just began my fourth year here at UNC. And I study three-dimensional architecture of Drosophila chromosomes.
And my name is Markia Smith. I'm a fourth year graduate student at UNC as well. And I study environmental and genetic determinants of health disparities, particularly in historically marginalized populations.
They're both really interesting. I think it'd be kind of good to give everyone a little bit of a background about both of you and kind of where your upbringing and how you got into science, and when did you first start liking it, and was it always like an initial like, or did it kind of grow over time? I think it'd be good to kind of give everyone a little bit of a background about that.
Yeah, for me, it's maybe a little bit surprising. When I was in high school, when I started high school, I was always very good at science, but I just didn't really like it. I think that maybe I didn't have sort of the right mindset when I was in science courses, but I loved math. I thought it was fun to like do little puzzles, and I thought science was just something where you read a textbook, you memorize things, and then you move on with your life. And then as I kind of got a little bit further in science, I remember my high school chemistry course was one where I felt like I was kind of doing those puzzle sort of situations and problems. And so then I joined Science Olympiad in my high school. And then I really fell into, oh, I do love biology. I think the biology part is really cool. And then started taking advanced biology courses, and the rest is kind of history. I really fell in love with everything that I saw there. And in particular, I was drawn to genetics because I was sort of mesmerized by how these little molecules inside every single cell are identical, yet they do different things in different cells at different times. And I don't know, I just thought DNA was really cool. So my love has kind of grown from there. And then coming into research, I did a lot of research as an undergraduate. I studied laminopathies, which are a class of genetic disorders caused by a point mutation to one gene. And when I was there, I figured out that science actually is not just memorizing things and coming back to it later. It's a lot of discovery and exploration, and doing math is something I use every day. So I was able to find that sort of puzzle solving feeling when I was doing science research.
So mine was pretty young. I remember starting like in the science fair in like the second grade. And at the time at my school, you had to be in a certain grade to participate. So I was like waiting for my turn to be able to participate. And I finally made it to third grade. And I was like, yes, I get to make a volcano. And so I started out doing like volcanoes, and I did like one where I did like the circuits, the electrical circuits, and I was just so interested in it. And then eventually I started participating in things like Science Olympiad. And I really got interested in one event in particular was protein modeling. And I actually went to a trade school. So my trade was chemistry laboratory sciences. So I loved chemistry so much so that I decided that I did a summer research internship when I was a junior in high school, studying HIV structures and trying to figure out the structure. And then eventually I got to undergrad and I was like, okay, I want to keep doing this. And I decided to major in biochemistry because I like the biology side of things as well, and like especially proteins. And then from there, I wanted to work more on less basic science, and I wanted to move more towards translational science. So I joined a lab that was dedicated to looking at breast cancer dormancy in biomedical engineering, and we basically try to create these 3D molds to study cancer dormancy, and it was so cool. So then I decided I'm just going to keep going with this. And now I'm like the cancer person. So
Yeah, I think I'm more like Alexis in terms of like, I think I started off really, really liking maths, but then obviously like the DNA is so fascinating, but then proteins are as well. So it's just like such a big spectrum of, it's
Yeah,
like
there's so many
fascinating. Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Growing up, did you guys have any sort of like role models that, not necessarily scientists, but it could be scientists or like family or anyone like that who kind of supported you along the way?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm actually from an Amish community originally, and I cannot say there was a single other Black person who was around. There aren't many Black Amish people. So it was really important that I had strong family sort of connections, and I could read for pretty much as long as I can remember. And my grandfather and I used to sit and read his encyclopedias. And
I
my
used to do
favorite
that too.
I used to read the world books with my grandfather. And my favorite one was the M, because it had Madame, or M or C, I forget which one, but it had Marie Curie. And I thought she was incredible. And so when I was in kindergarten, we had superhero day and I dressed up as Marie Curie while everyone else was dressing up as like their dad, a firefighter. One of the kids in my class dressed up as his cat.
That sounds like me.
Right. And my mom had no idea. First of all, she didn't know who she was. So my mom had to call my grandparents and say, "What have you been reading with my daughter? And who is this person?" And then she ended up dressing me like in hospital scrubs that were way too big and gave me a little name tag. And then I walked around with like a textbook or something and told everybody about polio and how it was so important that you get your polio vaccine and all of these things. So I would say those were certainly sort of my like foundational like role models, I suppose. And then as I got older and learned a lot more about science, there were other people who came out stereotypically like Rosalind Franklin, even though I want my career to look nothing like how hers appeared. And then my high school biology teacher, she and I were very, very close. And even when I return home now, I still have coffee with her anytime that I can. And we keep in contact. So yeah, those would be the people that come to mind as role models. They're not, I don't know, I don't have many of them, I would say. It was kind of something that I felt like an odd person out, and that I was sort of paving my own way. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty similar to Alex. I was raised by my grandma, and my grandma doesn't know anything about science. When I would be doing different things, she'd be like, "Yeah, I don't know what she's doing, but I bought it for her," or like a science kit, a telescope, whatever it was. She was like, "Yeah, I got it. I don't know what she's doing with it though." So she always encouraged me to try different things, and whatever project I wanted to do, she was down for. And then similar to Alex, as I grew up, like my trade teacher in high school became my mentor, and she's kind of what helped me get into research. And then along the way, I met different mentors. Like one of my mentors is on my committee right now, and she's amazing and she's really helpful. And she's a Black woman, so that's really helpful, having a more diverse committee.
Have you found like that throughout your like schooling experience that there has kind of been support for you to kind of achieve like these higher kind of goals, like attainment goals, and like within kind of science? Have you found that there is kind of that support level?
Yeah, I think so. So I guess for me in my really small community, it was that's why I got involved with Science Olympiad. That seemed sort of like the main way that people were able to be exposed to these opportunities in the first place, even. And you could like try out what you were interested in. My school was a really big feeder school for like engineering programs. So our science Olympiad was more dedicated towards that instead of the things I was looking into. But yeah, I remember in my high school biology course, I was really close with my biology teacher, and she sent me to Indianapolis, the capital of Indiana, to work at Riley Children's Hospital. So I went there for like a long weekend or something, and talked to a bunch of people who were actively doing research in the areas that I was sitting and sort of studying. And I got to participate in a bunch of like lab sort of things, like feeding babies or embryonic zebrafish diabetes drugs that hadn't yet been tested. And so then I got to see like all of the big microscopes and things like that. So I think that it's kind of started with my participation in Science Olympiad that gave me the leg that sort of the leg up that demonstrated I am interested in having these opportunities. And then that was sort of executed when I was a little bit older and had made relationships with the teachers who were going to give me those opportunities. But then I went to a very rigorous undergraduate university. I went to the University of Chicago, and there it wasn't, I don't necessarily think I would call it opportunities at that point. They gave out research positions like they were candy. So it was very easy to get involved with more things once I was there.
Yeah. And what kind of like challenges have you both faced along the journey, and I suppose kind of more specifically with like within your career? Because I feel like once you come out of school and then you have to go into kind of like higher education and then you have to get a career, like I always find that so much more like difficult. Like, well, for me, like I had no clue what I was doing, like, and I feel like sometimes there is kind of a lack of support and lack of guidance for people, especially the people who are like the first generation in their family to go to university and things like that, and from people from like different backgrounds as well. What kind of challenges, if at all, have you kind of faced along the way?
So I would say that our graduate school, UNC, does really well at supporting like whatever industry. If you want to go into industry, academia, like whatever you want to do, they're really supportive. And if they don't have the resources, they find people who have the resources. So that's really positive at like the graduate school level. And in terms of challenges, I would say the most challenging thing is finding out what is your niche and what fits you. And like sometimes both me and Alex are computational biologists as well, and sometimes that can be really difficult being the only Black person and Black woman in that space. And so some of the challenges can come in just like having to navigate different fields and figure out how you can take up space in those fields. For me personally, I feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, something that came to mind immediately when you asked what the challenges were peers, to be honest. It's very difficult for me, it's been very difficult to find friends inside these spaces. And in terms of like recruitment, you can get me here by telling me how great your program is. But in terms of like retention and happiness in that program, I really need to have other people who I can connect with. And that's something that certainly has not always been around. I was fortunate to go to an undergraduate university that was blossom, like it was the most diverse place I had been, but that's not saying much because I was from an Amish community. But I mean, even at U Chicago, I didn't necessarily hang out with people who were in my biology classes. I had other friends outside of that. And I think that that's kind of a recurring theme in my professional experience is that I always have people outside of my professional experience who I connect with. And that seems to be sort of like a recurring problem, I would say. They're just exactly what Markia pointed out. I am the only Black geneticist or computational biologist often. And because of that, whenever someone else who looks like me comes into the space, there's an automatic sort of like, oh, we need to put the two of you together so you can be friends. And, not everyone who looks like me is going to want to be my friend or
Yeah.
in direction. So I think that in terms of that, it's really difficult to find community. And that is unfortunately going to just continue to be a problem for a long time because these things change slowly.
Yeah. Obviously the scientific community is no exception to systematic racism, and not just kind of within the workforce, it's like you kind of discussing with like peers and stuff, but it's also kind of in the data and all of the studies as well. Like it's mostly targeted at European populations. In both your opinions, what are some of the key kind of challenges that exist today?
Yeah, I think we already started talking about that. Recruitment, not necessarily a huge problem. retention and happiness in that place is a big, big problem. So, I mean, not to become too political, but it's very difficult to be a Black woman at UNC right now because of all of the struggle that we have seen for other Black women at our institution. There was one case that was just in the news where there was a Black woman who was a journalist and she was up for tenure, and everybody approved her tenure until it got all the way to the top, and then the administration did not approve her for full professorship. And so it's really frustrating in those situations when you see that, particularly at your university, because, you know, I looked to this woman as someone who had done all of the right things. She had an excellent track record, an excellent resume, yet it felt like no matter what she did, because of the way that she looked and presented herself and her, you know, she had found her voice and was not afraid to use that. And so it felt very much like she had done something wrong. And it doesn't really matter like how good you are at what you're doing at the end of the day. If you don't adhere to other people's political beliefs, then you're not going to be successful in some spaces. And that's, yeah, that's really, really discouraging and a big problem. I think that that certainly hinders people's happiness at institutions. It makes it nearly impossible for that because even, you know, it's not, I don't know this woman at all, but she, like, her struggle that I saw made me immediately look at myself and think, okay, am I being too outspoken? Am I doing too much? And I think that that fear is something that I already needed to suppress and work through before I ever saw something like this that really affirmed those fears. So yeah, being recruited to institutions, I don't think is the problem. It's really what the institution is doing and the way that they conduct themselves that can make or break sort of a situation. So retention is a big issue. Like I already touched on, it's difficult to find friends a lot of times in these settings, and people who like actually understand what your life is like and the things that you enjoy, they can find some sort of enjoyment or connection to. That's really hard. And so having diverse faculty, having diverse student populations and trainee populations can't happen unless the institution is in a place where they are very welcoming to those people and able to support them once they're there.
Yeah, I agree. And to tack on to that would be the fact that, you know, it's common knowledge that people of color tend to get grants less. And so things like that also cause an issue when the issue lies in the environment, in the systemic racism and the systematic racism. So if we don't change those things, we're never going to recruit as many Black participants and people of color as we need to. And so if we don't change the environmental space, it really doesn't matter how many people we recruit. And like they're trying to mass hire and they're trying to do all these mass hires of faculty, but like that's not going to change if retaining the faculty is the issue.
Yeah, no, definitely retention and the kind of environment are so important. For those who don't know, would you be able to kind of discuss what Black in Genetics is and what made you set it up, and what was that kind of journey like for both of you?
The path to starting Black in Genetics, I think, was a very quick one for both of us. We kind of found ourselves in that position. But for anybody who doesn't know, there were several Twitter groups last year that were started by Black people in different academic spaces, and they named their groups like Black Birders for people who study birds, or Black in neurogenetic or neuroscience, not neurogenetics, Black in neuroscience for people who study neuroscience. So these different organizations had kind of spontaneously popped up on Twitter and were having weeks where they sort of celebrated all of the Black people who exist in these different spaces. And I saw this happening and was thinking to myself, it seems like a Black in Genetics group would be really important. I mean, if you think about what race is, it really comes down to genetics and ancestry. That's the way that we define a lot of these things. So I thought it would be very important to see a Black in Genetics week come up. And one night I was laying in bed on Twitter and I replied to a thread of organizers who had started different Blacken weeks. And I asked them what the protocol was for starting one, because I felt like there should be a Blacken Genetics Week. And the next morning I woke up to a retweet that had quoted what I asked and said, "Congratulations, you're the founder. Go ahead and start Blacken Genetics and have a Blacken Genetics Week." And I think that Markia saw that and she sent me a text that was something to the effect of like, "Let's get it poppin'." And she jumped on board very quickly and helped. We did it all together. So we started making the logo. I would draw something up in Illustrator, send it to Markia, and then she would give me edits to assimilate, and then we would put those edits in, and then then we had a logo to begin with. We started planning out like what actual days we wanted to have during our Blacken Genetics Week, and it really took off from there. From the time that I woke up to seeing that we were the founders of Blacken Genetics to the start of the week was, I think, 6 or 7 days. It was really, really fast.
That is such a quick turnaround. I don't know how you guys did it. What are some of the kind of overarching goals of Blacken Genetics? Like, what is the overall kind of aim that you're hoping for?
The main aim is just to be a space for Black geneticists, honestly. We just wanted to create community and amplify their voices because there's not very many of us. And like in comparison to some of the other groups, they're a lot larger and they have a lot more people in there. So it was really just a space for everyone to come together, to provide resources, to get younger folk interested in genetics, and to just really be there for each other, especially during the pandemic where things were really rough. And a lot of us were graduate students, so we had to continue going.
And how did you what was your reaction to the response? Because I was even seeing it as well. That's how I first came across it, because I was like seeing all the tweets and then I was like nosing at people. What was that response like for you guys? Because obviously you set it up in such a short period of time. What was that like, seeing that like kind of huge response?
It was absolutely incredible. I was blown away by how quickly we were welcomed into the community, but also celebrated. There was so much engagement, and there were some people who went from accounts that only had like a couple hundred followers to like 1,000 followers over the course of a week. And we were one of those accounts. We broke 1,000 easily, very quickly in the first week. It was a really, really big welcome into the community. But at the same time, I felt like there was a lot, because we're getting so much attention. I felt like there was a lot of pressure on what we were doing. And I think that's why we were able to do such a good job, was because of all of the attention that we were getting. So it went away from, oh, this is just kind of something fun that we were going to do this week, to like, this is actually very important and we need to do a really good job of what we're doing. And we tried to emphasize sort of oh my goodness, what's the word I'm looking for? We were trying to recognize sort of like the social unrest that was going on at the same time as when we were conducting this week. So I say it's about celebration and establishing community, but the reality is, at the time, the United States was going through a terrible, I don't know, actually maybe terrible is the wrong word, a really important time where we were sort of resurfacing with all of these issues that had just been sort of pushed away since the civil rights movement. That was really coming back to fruition, and people were paying attention to that. They were paying attention to, police brutality in Black communities, and they were paying attention to, oh, well, we don't have representation in scientific spaces. And there were several, this is really strange, but there were several white people who were coming to me and apologizing and saying, oh, I haven't been doing enough. And so it was, I felt that it was really important to sort of recognize what in the genetic space was in our control, and what geneticists could do to sort of change the trajectory of the genetics field, because there is a very racist history in the genetics field. And we need to be very aware of that as we're conducting things now, to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And we were trying to point out to scientists that it doesn't necessarily matter what your political or beliefs are. your science is going to be political at the end of the day, particularly if you're doing something like what Markia studies, which is, health disparities. It doesn't matter what you believe, because people will read what you publish and they will put their own spin on things. So you need to be really careful with the words that you use and the way that you conduct yourself. And so I wanted that to also be part of the focus of our week. And I think that we conducted that pretty well. We had one day that was dedicated to these topics called a big call to action. And I think that that was a really important day during the week.
Yeah. I think social media at the moment is just like, so obviously there's so much negativity on it, but sometimes like it can do like this, it can be just so good to kind of get people's voices out there and just like show like there are so many scientists out there, like so many amazing scientists like doing such good work, and then like from then you can just be like, oh, what is this person doing, and then you go like down a rabbit hole and then you kind of research what they're doing, and then you it's just, I think it's just so important. I think that really kind of highlighted the power of social media. But for you guys, like what kind of network did you build from that? Because I suppose, as you said, like so many people were coming and like contacted you. What support have you received from other organizations, or like interest in like getting involved and kind of like expanding this, I suppose?
So we have a lot of interest, particularly from journalists, and from journals and journalists. A lot of people were interested in hearing our story and collaborating with us. And we were very dedicated to making sure that, the journals were held accountable, because one of the biggest things for us is accessibility. Like, a lot of the younger people can't access your journals to get interested in genetics because there's a paywall. And so we wanted to work with different journals like Nature Genetics to try to get more accessible prices, at least for our members and for other Black members in other organizations, because that was so important. Besides the fact that we have a lot of collaborations with other organizations that are looking to help us with internships, or, like Gene Tech reached out to us for different things, and other people just trying to figure out how they can support our mission, while us making sure that it also benefits us and our members.
Yeah, so another sort of aspect of like the support we received, I think, was it came from the other Blackened groups. So when we were trying to, it was a really quick turnaround to get our week going. And when we were in the planning phase, we had meetings with Blackened Neuro, and then also people from Blackened Mammalogy, I think it was. They had one of their founders is like really, really helpful. And they gave us all of the tips and all of the things that they learned from their weeks to make sure that we were not making the same mistakes that they did. And that was also really great. And we've stayed in close contact with all of those people even now. We have a Slack group that's separate, so we can stay in communication.
That's really, really nice. What are you guys kind of hoping to do this year, and also for the future of the group? What are your plans like going forward?
Well, we want to try to make things bigger and better.
Of course, of course.
Not to be punny, but the hope is that I'm in my last year of grad school, so I'm really roughing it right now. But and Alex is also roughing it. But we're hoping to expand things. We're working on getting an executive board, so me and Alex can kind of hand off more things and not have to be the only ones doing things for it. And the hope is to continue to build our community bigger and try to really connect the members with internship opportunities, the journals, and different things like that, and try to do some community-oriented activities, because we've done like wine hours or like happy hour type of things. But it would be nice if like the people who are local to us, we could potentially meet up and try some things now that most people are vaccinated.
Yeah, I think for the long term, we've talked, so we have some friends in the community who live in Hawaii, and they were very involved and said, you need to have a Blackened genetics conference in Hawaii so we can all meet each other. And I think that that is a long-term goal, but is a worthwhile goal to pursue. And yeah, like Markia said, we're working on putting together our executive board right now. We have a group of 8 of us who are planning the Blackened Genetics week that's coming up this fall. So hopefully they'll stick around and continue with us. And they have said they want to be board members. So we know that, but it's really just about organizing and making sure that everybody sort of has a place and a job. So that's kind of what's coming next.
I mean, what have you guys kind of learned along the way of this whole journey and throughout your career? Like, what are some of the things that you have learned throughout this whole process?
I think what I've learned is that failure is okay. As a perfectionist, it was very difficult to get used to that idea. So I think just us trying different things and seeing what works and what doesn't was really helpful, and kind of help culminate different ideas for me.
Yeah, for me, it wasn't necessarily the failure part. I'm okay with that. But what I struggle with is that these things change very slowly. And I think that's something that, I've heard song lyrics that are to the effect of like, I'm going to be doing this until I'm over. Like the sort of work that we've fallen into is something that is not going to happen quickly. And that's difficult for me to sort of conceptualize, because I think, oh, as soon as people hear about how bad things are, they're going to want to change it immediately. But the reality is, even if one person wants to change things, it takes a lot more people than just that one person, and convincing all of those people together and then convincing them to change in the same way is also nearly impossible. So yeah, I really struggled with that, and thinking about, well, we've already had this Twitter revolution. Why haven't we seen more changes? Why are things like people not getting tenure at my university still happening? And being okay with that is very difficult for me. So I think that's something I've certainly learned. But also at the same time, I've learned that there are people who are very supportive and very quick to embrace change, and that are, equally as passionate about these topics as I am. So despite, change being slow, there still is a community that does have support and does want to help. And finding those people, I think, is really the main way that I can cope with my struggle over the timeline.
Oh, definitely. Thank you so much, both of you, for talking to me today. I think Black in Genetics is so important to kind of amplify Black voices and get the great work that kind of everyone's doing out there. And I can't wait to see what you guys do this year as well. So I'm going to keep watch on Twitter.
Perfect. Yes, please do.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, if you enjoyed this video, then make sure you check out some of our other videos in our series by subscribing below or going to our website, frontlinegenomics.com. I hope you enjoy.